I did it like 5 times. Or stop making it fake. Put your feet down. Put your feet all the way down. You're nasty. My place was recording, and they just heard them. Like somebody was like, "Oh, see, she had it." Martin Luther King Program, and they just heard me yelling at me. Put your feet down.
They do. He's recording right now. Oh no, he's coming out.
Ooh, look how quiet everyone got. Can you all hear me? Okay, hold on. Thank you, Mr. Baker. That's better. Could everyone please rise for our flags? We'll now have a moment of silence. Thank you. You may be seated. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Layson Smith, and I am the Chief Equity Officer here at Columbus School for Girls. It is my pleasure to welcome you to CSG's Martin Luther King Jr. program. While we're sad that we couldn't all be together today, we appreciate those of you who have joined us via our live stream. I also bring you greetings on behalf of our head of school, Jennifer Ciccarelli, who was unable to be with us physically, but is with us online and, of course, in spirit. Taking time to honor Dr. King's legacy continues to be an important tradition here at CSG. This year's program theme, Changes Through the Halls of CSG, allows us the opportunity to not only reflect on where we are, but to also learn from our history. CSG was already 70 years old when Dr. King was assassinated in 1968. And even though we have always been a progressive institution for young girls and women, our community looks a lot different now than it did then. Now, in 2022, students of color represent 38% of our student body. And there is still work to be done so that we can ensure that all of our students feel a true sense of belonging here at CSG. We are committed to this work and continue to develop and implement our roadmap. Dr. King's work helped to change this nation and made him one of the most well-known leaders of the modern civil rights movement. However, the truth of his legacy is often sugar-coated or sanitized. He championed economic justice. He taught Black self-love while also fighting for racial justice. If we look at his speeches and his life's work carefully, we'll see that he was vocal about promoting a more radical approach to justice, not one that asked people to be neutral on racism, but one that pushed back against neutrality. Black American writer and poet James Baldwin said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." As the Chief Equity Officer who is leading the charge to ensure that all students, staff, faculty, and families feel safe, connected, and respected, every day when I show up to this beautiful campus, I think about the things we must face in order to change them. I think about my daughter, who is a Form 1 student here, and the experiences I want her and her classmates to have. I think about how our DEIB work is not separate from our commitment to an excellent education, but is actually core to an excellent education. What does it look like for all of us to engage in this work and to be accountable not only to each other, but to ourselves? Next week, I will celebrate being in this role for 1 year. And while we've accomplished a lot, there are always opportunities for us to do more. Thanks to our anti-racism task force, we now have an anti-racism action plan. It is informed by our CSG community. The plan includes a commitment to increasing the number of diverse staff and faculty, specifically staff and faculty of color. It also includes taking a comprehensive look at our curriculum, pre-K to 12, to ensure that it is diverse, inclusive, and relevant to what is happening in our country and in our world. We are also in the final stages of completing our CSG Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belonging Statement. This community-informed statement will serve as the anchor to our DEIB work. I share some of the work we're currently doing because transparency helps with accountability. Like the important work of Dr. King, CSG has made a commitment to not sit in the place of neutrality, specifically as it relates to our anti-racism work. Again, we are so grateful that you have joined us for our annual MLK program, and we hope that you will continue to show up as we all continue to move this important work forward. Thank you. At this time, we invite those who are able to stand and join us as we sing Lift Every Voice and Sing. Following the song selection, we will hear from Senior Caden Edwards, who will share the origin of the observance and the history of the Beauty of African American Culture Club.
You may be seated. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kaden Edwards. I'm a senior and president of the Beauty of African American Culture Club. I would like to thank you all for coming to this year's MLK program. I will begin by sharing the origin of observance. A civil rights activist and preacher, Dr. King was world-renowned for his nonviolent approach to fighting for the rights of those whose voices had been ignored in the United States. His speeches were masterpieces of rhetoric, and they inspired many activists who came after him. In his I Have a Dream speech, Dr. King told of his dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Through his conscious, deliberate, and organized protesting, he opened the door for everyone to continue to work toward the realization of this creed. Martin Luther King Jr. worked his entire life for the cause of equality and social justice, and he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. In 1983, Congress declared his birthday a national holiday to be celebrated each year on the third Monday of January. The first observance of Dr. King's birthday as a legal national holiday was on January 20th, 1986. Dr. King's actual birthday is January 15th. We continue to feel his loss today, but we celebrate his legacy. I would also like to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit about the Beauty of African American Culture Club. BAACC started with the name the Black Awareness Club, but 9 years ago changed the name to Beauty of African American Culture Club. We are a student-led club, and our members believe in our goal, which is to advance a unique culture and expose others to that culture. Our objective is to reflect our culture in a positive light in this environment of a diverse community. We raise awareness of these issues by African Americans by organizing events to fundraise for the causes and or issues being faced. One of those events is our Soul Food Feast, which will be held in spring this year. BAACC is important to the CSG community. As friends, we share a culture, we share a space, and we share our experiences with the CSG community. Our ultimate mission as a student-organized club is to promote education, to increase awareness, and to enlighten our peers to the beauty of African and African American heritage and culture. I will now invite Asana Ranzier, Secretary of BAACC, to lead us in the responsive reading.
We Shall Overcome has got to be more than a memory. We Shall Overcome has got to be more than a protest song. We Shall Overcome has got to be more than a protest song. We Shall Overcome has got to be more than a melody. We Shall Overcome We Shall Overcome has got to be more than a freedom song. We Shall Overcome has got to be more than a song we sing. Please stand and join us in singing We Shall Overcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Sierra Latham, and I'm Vice President of BWACC. Today, we are here to honor Dr. King and his legacy, to honor the strides that have been made so liberty and justice for all aren't just words. They aren't the epitaph of a dead-end dream. We're here today to honor the strides made so equality isn't written off as a fallacy, and so one day we may reap the seeds sown by our predecessors. I had to ask myself, what does this history mean to me? Answering this question came with some hard-to-swallow pills, like maybe I enjoyed learning in history class, maybe I could be a little more grateful for all the things I would have not been afforded if the path was not forged by past acts of courage. I only glide through life from the blood, sweat, and tears of those before me. Because of them, I can sit where I want, vote in 2 years, and get an education. Though the bravery of these trailblazers compare to that of myth and legend, these are real people with faces and names. The Honorable Judge Denise Page Hood is one of them. Born and raised in Columbus, Judge Hood graduated from CSG in 1970. She was one of the earliest Black students in attendance. She went on to Yale University to earn her bachelor's degree, then to Columbia University School of Law. She was nominated and on June 16, 1994, appointed by President William J. Clinton to the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan. Judge Hood's career has spanned nearly 40 years, and it's because of her dedication to education that students like myself not only get a seat at the table, but are welcomed and embraced. And today, it is my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Judge Denise Page Hood.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for that very nice introduction. We're here to talk about change through the halls of CSG, and I thought I'd begin with I should begin with a few thanks. One, thanks, Sierra, for that nice introduction. Thanks to your head of school. Thanks to your chief equity officer. Also to the students who had contact with me and came and greeted me when I came in. Also to Lisa Dodge. And I also understand that there's a watch party out there organized, I think, by some of my classmates. We're all turning 70 this year, and they're acting like they're back at CSG. But I'm very grateful to them, Leslie Huntington, Leslie Wilson, and Jill Levy, for keeping our class together. You should know that we were the largest class ever when we graduated back in 1970, 45 girls. And that was like half the school then. So they stick together, and I'm glad that they do. They've really brought me back into the fold. But I want to, and I should tell you that when I'm getting ready to give up being chief judge at my court, which is by statute, not by popularity. And you should know that I came to CSG, which I'll talk about in a minute, with a good friend named Lisa Brustein, now Lisa Brustein Brand. And we got here. I'll tell you that story in a minute. But in any event, Lisa, keeps me pretty close to her. And so she came. I invited her to come when I was made chief judge. And she was acting kind of a little funny, and she said, I think I should tell you something. I said, what? She said, some other CSG people are coming. I said, you're kidding. And she said, no. And in fact, there were a number of my classmates, I think 6 or 8 of them, that came to cheer me on. And they gave me one of those Jill gave me one of those red and gold blankets. Well, they're like a little throw, right? They match nothing in my office, okay? So everyone who comes in says, where did you get that? And I get to tell them the history of being at CSG. So, change. And so Martin Luther King said, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but it comes with continuous struggle. And I think that's where we ought to start. I kind of agree with your chief equity officer that Martin Luther King has been made into kind of a mild-mannered guy, and I'm sure he was that way with his parishioners at his churches. But this was a very young man who presented with a bus boycott, said, yes, I'll lead it, and went on to be one of the best-known civil rights leaders in the world. And you don't do that by being nice to everybody. I mean, think about this. He had a team of people. I personally know one of them, Ambassador Andrew Young, but he had a team of people who were kind of a bunch of, kind of old and kind of middle-aged guys, all in the same place, all wanting to be in the front and everything, and he had to corral them. I mean, he had to corral people like Stokely Carmichael and have him meet in the same room with John Lewis, who was a firebrand of his own. And so he was a very, very big figure for us. But let's talk about change through the halls of CSG. And I'll begin by saying I recently came on the board, and we had a meeting, and my mother and sister knew I was going to come over and have a tour, and they wanted to have a tour too, because one of the changes was we didn't have this room. We didn't have, I don't think, this building. We changed into our gym attire in the gym auditorium and walked a few blocks down to play hockey. And there wasn't a swimming pool, and there weren't lockers. We had our own lockers, your regular locker, not a gym locker. There wasn't a shower. I mean, it was just a really different physical place. But more than that, I walked in today, and while I was mentioning my mother and sister, we were on our tour, and they're walking through what I think is the lower school. And my mother turned to me and she said, "Where did all these black girls come from?" And I think that she was just totally surprised. I mean, she comes to the flower sale and supports the flower sale. But when I was here, the number of ladies who greeted me when I came in earlier today amounted to all of the black students in the school, all of the black people that were the cooks or on maintenance, and anybody who drove a girl to school. That's how many were. I probably can name most of them. And I came here in the 9th grade, 4 years in the school. And I can tell you that I wasn't the first one. Leslie and Debbie Sawyer, I think, were the first students to come here. Trudy Preston, Kay Bell, Gail Whitaker. I mean, those were the kids that were in the 4th grade and up. I mean, there were a handful. And look, there's a ton of you guys now. I mean, I'm really impressed. And everyone is so friendly, and you have on those short skirts, which we'd be sent home for. Okay, so I want to say just a little bit about a change. Now, we heard a little bit about how things are different. And you should know that back when I was in high school here, of course, Dr. King was in the midst of the civil rights movement. And there were still places in America where his main job was to make sure that you could ride wherever you wanted to on the bus, that you could go to whatever hotel you wanted to go to when you were driving from north to south, that you could drink at a water fountain with everybody else, that you could eat at almost any place that you had enough money to eat at. And those are things that we'll never see again in this country, I hope. I mean, a sign that says, colored people drink here and white people drink here. I mean, you don't see those, right? Has anybody ever seen them other than in a picture? Adults, don't raise your hands, because although you're kind of young adults too. But his protest movement did away with that in many different ways. One, it just changed the hearts of people in many ways, that his spirit was nonviolence and love changes things. And in that, he got people to take down those signs. It was also economic. You have a bunch of cars of people going somewhere, and they're all African Americans, and you're not going to let them get food that they can eat in the restaurant. They might decide to get back in their car and drive somewhere else that would let them come in. So there was an economic piece of it that began to grow as well. So how did that impact us? Well, CSG in many ways is a microcosm of, well, at least half the world. And those changes impacted, I think, the school and everything around the school. The entire place became a different way. The city became a different way of looking at things. And part of what Dr. King did was to say, I want to break down a lot of barriers, not just the signs about eating and drinking and staying in a hotel. I want to change people's hearts, attitudes, and their thinking. And so, for instance, one of the things that I was asked to address was how that impacted me. But first, let me say a little something about being at CSG at that time and how it's changed. You know, I came here, and my parents were very clear. I'd taken a test at another junior high and tested well, and me and my friend Lisa had come here, and I'd come kicking and screaming. I did not want to be in a girls' school, and I didn't really want to be somewhere that wasn't at least integrated. I'd gone to a public elementary school where the principal was a black woman, and I had a role model of someone that I thought, I can be just like that. And you all know role models are really important, especially to young people. And then I was going to end up here where there was me, and then there were girls in a class, one or two behind me, and then one or two behind that, or one or two behind that. And really, in the beginning, I thought, I'll never have any friends. And in fact, my parents told me, don't expect to have friends. You're going there to get the best education you can get, and that's it. If you don't make any friends, we don't care about that. What we're really interested in is you getting the best education so you can go to the best college that you can. That's not what happens now. One of the changes, it looks to me, is that people decide CSG is a place they want to go. They choose CSG. You know, well, some of your parents might make you go here, right? But the truth of the matter, even your parents choose it. It doesn't just happen as a result of taking some tests to learn about test taking and then being recruited out of a public high school. That's a big change, that you have the opportunity to come to CSG because you want to come, and that you have the ability to make a friend that looks like you. Or maybe not. Maybe they look different from you, but at least you have those choices. You should know that there weren't any staff people that were in academics or in administration when I was here. That's a big change, too. That means we've opened the door to have different kinds of people interact with our students, both academically and administratively, and that's a big change. You may not see that because the people do predominantly the same kind of work that the people did before them. But it means that you have an open community, and as I said, some role models that are different than the ones that I had when I went here. I'm sure a lot of other things have changed, and the world has changed, but I want to say two other things that I think are really, really important. One is that I came here, and as I said, I didn't really expect that I would make friends. But I did make some friends. And it was good that I made those friends. But more importantly, I learned a lot of things about myself. Like, I'm going to admit it, something I don't think I've told many people. I used to recite all the African-American poetry that I knew anytime we went anywhere as a group. When we walked down to play hockey, that's what I did. When we were just sitting around goofing off, I was thinking about that poetry. And I think it helped me to identify and solidify myself. My parents were really good. I had a lot of friends at home and in my church, and so I didn't feel lacking. But sometimes, you know, I'm sure you all have had this happen, where the person comes up to you and said, I've been in Florida on spring break, and look, I'm almost as brown as you. And I used to say, oh, they don't get that. They don't get that. It doesn't go away, and that people actually treat you differently because of that. And we're learning more about that. We're learning how to talk to each other. I can tell you that I can only think of 3 of my classmates, and they're all wonderful people. that I ever talked to about race, who ever were conscious that maybe I might feel something different than they felt. And I don't think that's happening here. I'm hearing a lot more of a discussion about what it means to be diverse, which when I was here, that was not a word. Diverse was not anything that anybody said to anybody else. And so I think that's really important as well. And I learned another lesson here, and it has to do with being a female. I think the biggest lesson I learned here was to be able to have confidence in the competency of other females, to learn to work together with other females, and to trust their ability to do things. As I used to say, I went to CSG, and as far as we were concerned, girls did everything, from sports to academics and beyond. And I think that's has had a very, very big impact on me. And I want to get back to Dr. King when I say that. You know, one of the things Dr. King did was make the world a place, at least the United States a place where black people could get to do new things. They could become politicians. They could become doctors and lawyers for people unlike themselves. They could become judges. If you look at, in our court, we have a wall with all the judges' pictures. And you can see clearly that it's not until the 70s before there's an African-American person. I mean, the 70s. I mean, I had graduated from CSG before we started having an integrated bench in Detroit, which was predominantly black. And so I look at that and say, Dr. King and his work in the civil rights movement broke down barriers that I had the advantage of, which means that when I went in to be interviewed about being a judge, people just didn't ask me questions about, well, you're a woman, what are you going to do with your kids? They didn't ask me really about being an African American. I mean, it was an issue of womanhood more than anything else, because he had broken down those barriers that people had put up to make it seem that black people could not perform in very important jobs. I don't want to say that that's gone away. I don't want to say it's gone away. And I'm sure that you all know, as young women yourselves, that very often you are still discriminated against because you're a female. And I'm still discriminated against often because I'm a black person. And when I'm not, there's this thing called implicit bias. Remember, we took those signs down that said, you know, colored and white. But now we have this other underlying implicit bias that we have to continually work at, and which I think Dr. King would be proud of us doing. That's why we have an equity officer, a diversity officer, so we can learn more about how to break down those things within us that have held us back from being able to overcome the racial and sometimes still sex divide in our country. I hope you will continue to work on that. It's a challenge that I think we have. I'm glad I learned those lessons at CSG. I learned diplomacy. I learned diplomacy about being a black person. I learned when it's a good idea to say, call something out. Not long ago, I'm on another board, and we're talking about diversity and equity and inclusion. And one of the things they brought up was one of the members of the board said, I get up every morning, and I know I'm a black woman and what that means. And she explained that. And so we went on and talked, and I said, later on in the meeting, I said, those of you who are white, do you wake up in the morning and think about what it means to be white? And, you know, we're supposed to be having a safe conversation. And a few people were really upset. You know, what was I saying? Was I accusing them of having white privilege? Was I saying something negative? But I wasn't. I was just saying, try on what we feel. Put it out there. I look in the mirror. I know I'm a black woman. I know that's going to cause some issues somewhere. What does it mean that if you wake up and look in the mirror and you're white? Do you need to talk about that and think about that in the same way that African Americans do? And I think we're going to get to that. I think we're going to learn how to talk about race and how to accept change and make new change, the kinds of change that Dr. King would have wanted us to do. And so I thank you very much for inviting me here. I hope that I'm so excited about being on the board. This is like a very cool thing. I get to report back to my classmates what I'm doing. I may even get to be a rabble-rouser. I don't know. The headmaster, when I was here, gave me a little owl that was on his desk that had a chip on it to say that, to say he wasn't perfect and neither was I. But he didn't know that I'd carried that around for years. I had it on my desk even, that little owl with the chip reminding me that I'm not perfect, but that's where I want to be, and that I want to be perfect in my own skin. And so I thank you again for bringing me here to speak. I think there have been a lot of changes in the halls of CSG, and I mentioned some of them. And I think that there's a big commitment to that change. And I think that commitment to that change is seen in who will be our new head of school. You can't imagine that. I have a whole bunch of Spelman friends, and I was dying. When can I tell them this news? And so, that's a big step, and it's a big step for us to make at this time in the history of our school. But it's an important step, and I'm glad we've made it, and I support it fully. Dr. King said, if you can't fly, you can walk. And if you can't walk, you could run. And if you can't run, you could walk. And if you can't walk, you could crawl. But the main thing is to keep moving toward our goal of equality and freedom in this great nation of ours. And so I thank you again for having me here today to celebrate his legacy in our lives. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Judge Hood. Good afternoon. My name is Taylor Porter, and I am the Service Outreach Coordinator for the BAACC. Like Sierra said before, we are here to honor Dr. King and his legacy. And what a better way to do that than through music. African American spirituals, gospels, and folk music were all played an important role in the civil rights movement. These songs were sung for reasons like motivation, psychological and physical strength, and sometimes even just to pass the time. The use of music during movements, marches, and protests still continues today. Today we will get the chance to hear from the Ohio State University's own African American Voices Gospel Choir. The African American Voices Gospel Choir is a non-denominational gospel choir as well as a nonprofit student organization at The Ohio State University. Their purpose is to foster an environment on campus where students can come together to celebrate God's existence through music and the arts, as well as contribute to a diverse and urban community while striving to achieve academic excellence. And while doing so, sharing African American traditions with others. It is my pleasure to introduce OSU's African American Gospel Choir. Thank you.
A joyous daybreak.
Good afternoon. My name's Tyree Walton, and I'm the Assembly Lead of the Beauty of African American Culture Club. In this year's observance, we sought to inspire, to move people, not just figuratively. We mark how far things have come. We honor a legacy of change. The fight is not over, but today we celebrate. And no celebration is complete without dance. The beat of a drum, notes from the piano, spark feelings of inspiration that reverberate across people of all colors, creeds, and backgrounds. We chose to highlight a form of dance known as step. With sounds of body movements, including stomping and clapping, the style is derived from the percussive sounds of Africa. The practice of step is used at historically Black colleges, universities, and diverse dance teams across the nation. This afternoon, I invite you all to sing, shout, and most certainly cheer as I introduce, for the first time ever, CSG's Upper School Step Team.
But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free.
That concludes this year's MLK program. I would like to encourage all of you to take this MLK Day to reflect on Dr. King's legacy and the legacy of other civil rights activists. A special thanks to the BAC club leaders and faculty for putting on this wonderful program. Another shout out to Sierra Latham and Ryan Wallace for choreographing that amazing step routine and the entire step team. And thank you to our guest speaker, Judge Hood. And a thanks to our guest speaker, Judge Hood, and our guest gospel choir. Let us all rise to sing Sia Humba to conclude today's program.
seniors. We're going to dismiss. Who's at the bottom over here? All right, we'll let the sixth graders go out. Go ahead.